Thank you everyone for coming here today, and we are very honored and pleasure to have two entrepreneurs, really young startups here, Joshua and Lydia. But I would love to first have this opening session to let them do a quick introduction of themselves. Sorry. Let them introduce themselves to at least let you guys know what they're up to, what their background is, and what their company does, and we can go from there. So, hand over to you first, Lydia.
Hi everyone, I'm Lydia Hahn. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ModernLoop. What we do is we help companies automate and streamline a lot of their recruiting processes to save time and money. And before starting the company, my background was in product, so was a product manager for 7 years at a lot of high-growth tech companies, Salesforce, Meta, Slack, Brex, you name it. Always seen the struggle internally and how much manpower or woman power is needed to run recruiting. So built this software so that you can have an out-of-the-box package for any of your companies.
Cool. I'm Joshua. I'm the founder and CEO of Woolf. Woolf is legally the first global collegiate university that allows other education organizations to join and become member colleges. And then on the technology side, we integrate with those education organizations by API or through our learning platform.
Awesome, thanks for the introduction. Lydia, so your company, you went through YC in winter 21. That is literally in the middle of the pandemic. So what made you decide to do that? And I guess, has it been what you expected it to be?
Yeah, so I've always had the passion of starting a company someday in entrepreneurship, and being a product manager was really just to kind of prepare myself and learn how to build really great product for different types of users. And for me, why I started a company in the heart of the pandemic was because at that time, that's when I did a lot of introspection and really decided to go for my dream, and also noticed that with the pandemic, there was actually going to be a big shift from working in person to working remote or working hybrid. And with that, the problems of recruiting coordination and operations actually get escalated higher because now you have some people on Zoom, some people in office. How do you coordinate time zones when everyone is in different locations? That is exacerbated even more because of this shift in the market. And so when we built ModernLoop, we actually built it for companies who are hiring and recruiting in this new landscape. And what we're seeing is even though people are going back into office, interviews are still happening remotely, and then they're bringing people in for the final kind of sell call. So it's cool because we actually realized there's a shift in the market and built this product to actually help solve that pain point that everyone was trying to figure out what to do. And now it's here to stay. You know, remote interviewing is a thing now. Zoom interviewing is a thing now. You get to interview with, so much more of your time and make sure that you're balancing interview load across all your interviewers equally.
Awesome, thank you. And for Joshua, so you ran a company about 4 to 5 years ago now. You went through obviously the pre-pandemic times and during the pandemic and now post-pandemic. So how has things changed for you? And also, I guess, what are some of the decision-making process you have to navigate through all these uncertainties, ups and downs, and all this new stuff that's going on throughout these phases of these recent years?
It's a great question. Probably there are two things that really stand out. The first one is that we were initially opening an office in San Francisco, and so I moved to the United States from Europe where I was living, and began scoping office space, and then the pandemic hit. So we quickly needed to come up with a strategy for being an online remote-first organization, which we did. So that was a major change. The second one is we're in higher education, and there are 27,000 universities in the world roughly, and pre-pandemic, online portions of learning or even wholly online learning was kind of viewed with some level of question mark over it. And then our entire total addressable market moved online. So that was a really big mental shift where probably the Overton window of what could be purchased as an online product went up to maybe $60,000, $70,000 a year to purchase an online education because all university education was online. So that really changed how we positioned ourselves in the market in terms of what we were doing. It was just an unexpected major beneficial shock actually to where we were positioned.
Got it. And I guess for the both of you, right, in recent times, obviously, what's really happening in the macroeconomic scale, higher interest rates, high inflation,
supply chain shocks and all these major stuff that's going on, the war and everything, right? How has all these been affecting your businesses, and I guess how have you been thinking about prioritization, right? Like what is like your main priority right now as a company?
Great question. I think every single founder has a definition of what it means to their company. For me, it's the way I think about it is in uncertain times means that one, you have to be well capitalized to make sure that you can weather the storm, because you need to just be ready to go headstrong against anything that might come your way as the founder or the person leading a company. Same thing here is you have to kind of create a plan A, B, C, and maybe even D, because you don't know what the scenarios are. And so financial planning, product planning, team planning, you have to think through all the scenarios and really kind of push through what could happen in each scenario and just have a plan for it. For us, I think the lucky thing is we actually raised our Series A and we closed earlier this year. So right before everything
Congrats, by the way.
Thanks. So it was like a really good timing fundraising for us. We didn't need to raise the round, but we did it because we got interest. And we're able to use that and kind of plan out what did that mean given these uncertain times for our product. At the same time, everyone saw, layoffs are happening, recruiting is kind of like all over the place. If you look for recruiting as an industry, if you look time segments, you can see there's a lot of fluctuation, but if you zoom out, it's actually pretty stable across the board. So, when COVID hit, layoffs happened, and then right after that, people realized, oh my gosh, we need people to actually build the business, a hiring surge, and so there's this wave that happens, and if you zoom out long enough, it's going to equalize to normal states. So for us, actually, the interesting thing is we're in the business of saving companies time and money. And so even though the market is some are not hiring, some are not hiring, the folks who are hiring are actually being very conscious of their spend and thinking about how to be more efficient with their spend and not just, hire people to solve what can we bring on to actually run the same processes, get the same result with a fraction of the cost. And so that's where we're positioning ourselves, and our product is well positioned. And money and cost for businesses.
Got it. And what about you?
So I think the first thing was just around financial stability. Once we realized that the likelihood of future venture raises was reduced, we needed to have a clear pathway to maintaining our roadmap and maintaining our runway. The second thing was probably around customer health and making sure we were really able to support customers because it was potentially a hard time for them. There's a hypothesis, which is that education is countercyclical. So when the economy gets more challenging, if you're in finance, you might go back for a master's degree or something like that. And so we weren't certain whether that hypothesis would be true. It turns out that most of the organizations we partner with are growing faster now than they were a year ago. So that was actually beneficial to us ultimately. And maybe the last thing is, when I started the company, I was on faculty at Oxford and I was living in Berlin, and my co-founders were Ukrainian in origin. And so we had been growing the team in Ukraine. And so when the war broke out, we had to do quite a bit of work to move people around. Luckily, we anticipated things and got them out of harm's way ahead of the invasion by Russia. But that was a huge piece of kind of operational work that was unexpected that needed to be undertaken.
Got it. And Joshua, you mentioned about hypothesis, right? So for the founders or potential founders out there, could you probably advise them, how do you think about testing hypotheses? How much budget do you have, or how much time do you give yourself to test each hypothesis to see whether it is actually what it is or it's not? Or how do you handle that?
I don't think there's any rule, right? Probably the hypotheses come at different orders of magnitude. So if you have a unique insight into the market you're working in, probably it's pretty big, right? And so you're betting the whole company on the idea that you have some level of insight about how things go. And that's probably big enough that somebody isn't already doing it, right? So with market efficiency, you assume marginal gains are going to already be taken up by your competitors. And so your whole company is testing some level of major hypothesis. But you might have smaller ones, which are like, should we advertise on Google Ads or should we do it on LinkedIn? And then you just need to set yourself a budget and define what good looks like. So maybe it's some amount of money for some number of conversions you want to see. Those are much smaller and easier tactical decisions. The big ones, though, are when should you have enough grit to keep going and grind it out, even though everybody tells you you're wrong. And so if you're doing something innovative, many people will think it's mistaken or wrong, and you have to kind of push past that. But you need to be open to the insight that you might just be mistaken yourself. So it's a really challenging balance the higher you go in the order of magnitude around those hypotheses.
Any best practices you can share on that, or that you personally adopt by? And maybe Lydia, you can chime in as well if you have any thoughts on how founders can think about that.
I think you want to be able to define what good looks like, right? And set the time boundaries on it and set what the outcomes are expected to be. And if you're not hitting those outcomes, you need to really ask, what are the adjustments that need to be made? And have you been able to run parallel experiments to see whether or not your hypotheses are wrong? It's a really healthy way to approach risk and a healthy way to take bets on what can happen. So if you see some kind of opportunity, that's great, and you should pursue it, and you should push really hard, but you also want to know what the exit ramp looks like for that, and what kinds of pivots might be available to you.
That's great. If I could add to that, I guess I'll just draw from my own experience building a SaaS business. For us, we don't probably have the scale that you have in terms of experimentation, but what we have is close relationship with our customers. So the biggest thing is whenever you're thinking about building a product, you should have a very good understanding of what are you building, why is it important to the customer, what core problem is it solving for the customer, and that's your hypothesis essentially. Then when you build it, you want to actually be able to measure in your product metrics whether or not your customer is using it and actually talk to them. So for us, we care a lot about talking to customers. We record all our customer success calls and our sales calls in Gong because I will go and my evening time meal kind of entertainment is actually just watching customers talk about our product or watching our salesperson kind of talk to a new prospective customer and figuring out what problems do they have. Does that align with our roadmap? And you're kind of always triangulating what your customers need and how that maps to your roadmap for prospective customers, what your customers need and what you're currently shipping for existing customers, and make sure you're sanity checking yourself by just talking to users. That's the most important thing you can do. I mean, I was at Facebook where we have billions of users and you can just run a test and be like, oh, the data goes up. But actually maybe the data goes up because of something unforeseen that actually is not a good behavior that you want to incentivize for your users. So that's a really important thing for SaaS, is just like making sure that you're constantly in check with your customers, no matter how many customers you have. Like look at product metrics, talk to them, watch the video recordings, or even be in that session yourself and talk to them directly.
Thank you. And we did talk about capitalization, right? So in current times, obviously the balance sheet cash flow is the most important. I'm going to give you like a really difficult question to choose between increased revenue or reducing costs right now. Which do you prioritize and how do you split your time between the two of them?
So for us, actually, we did a whole cost exercise financially to understand every single line item, every single recurring spend, and whether or not we really needed it to grow the business. So I think there's two ways to look at this. If you haven't been following kind of like YC's recommendation, they have this state called being default alive in economic downturns. And it just means that you have enough money so that your cash burn will eventually equalize and you can sustain yourself without needing to raise another round of funding sometime down the road, given such turbulent times. That is one way to think about it, is we just want to be default alive. How do we make sure our costs monthly and our cash burn monthly, along with our projected revenue coming in, makes it so that we will get to default alive at a certain time. The other way to think about it, like maybe the earlier stage companies, is this is the best time to actually build your product. And so if you don't even have like revenue coming in, you can't project it, I would recommend, you just got to go for it, and this is the best time to move away all the distractions. Actually a great time to hire because of the layoffs. There's actually great talent in the market that you would have never been able to get before because the FAANG companies have crazy salaries. And so it's actually a really great time. You're really early stage. You just heads down, talk to users, write code, build your product, build a really awesome product, and then figure out how to, whether it's like the cost or the revenue that you want to figure out. It's like if you don't have a good product, there's no point in talking about cost or revenue. You just have to have a good product. So that's not a very direct answer, but I think it's circumstantial depending on where you are in your company, your business.
Yeah, I think I can only echo that. the cost of new revenue, you want to make sure you're not acquiring revenue at a price that ultimately is going to kill the company, right? And so it's a hard landing if you hire very expensive account executives and the payback period for any one of them is longer than your actual cash runway. So you have to have a pretty clear eye of what your cash position is and how long it's going to last. We have a lot of obligations at Woolf because we're a higher education institution to have a really robust cash runway. We have to service our students for many, many years. And so we have to be a little bit more conservative around some of those numbers. On the sort of cutting cost side, no organization wants to do a reduction in force. And so the best advice I've ever heard is if you are going to do one, do it early and make sure it's big enough to actually sustain you. Because if you have to do one twice, then you're going to be in very big trouble. It's just a huge morale kill to have to run a RIF on 2 occasions. So we've been lucky to not be in a position where we have to do that at Woolf, partially because of our more conservative cash treatment.
Got it. And I guess, question, what makes a good founder different from a great founder, in your opinion?
Happy to take a stab at it. I don't know that it's important to be a great founder, right? So I don't know if that's the right goal to chase just from the start. You could be just a lucky founder. You could have a great product in a great market. But generally, it's super hard, and so there are some kind of table stakes issues you need to solve. You have to have a lot of grit, and you need to have real judgment about when to quit your bets and when to make adjustments versus pushing on through. Maybe another point is to have great co-founders, and so having strong co-founders is really important for any kind of founder journey, I think.
Yeah, I plus one everything you said. I was going to say resilience, which, grit, it's very similar. But yeah, it's resilience and being right about the product and the market. Obviously, you've got to know when to quit when you realize that you're going down the wrong path. The second one is, this is something I heard from actually Andreessen Horowitz. They have this idea called the idea maze, and they say the best founders that they work with have gone through the idea maze, and basically if you think about a maze with your product, your startup idea, have you gone through all the different possibility angles, hit a block, think through, have you thought through everything in order to maximize your chances of winning? Right? Did you actually consider all the paths and consider backing out of those paths? And I think that's another way to say before you go into being resilient and going for a product in a market, have you done that exercise, and do you constantly do that exercise? Because new information comes every single time as you're building a company. And if you're constantly doing that exercise, then at one point you'll realize, maybe at some point you just got to stop and take 3 steps back and figure out, is this the right thing to work on, or do we shift focus? So that's the only one thing I would add to Joshua.
Got it. Thanks so much for your sharing your insights. Also curious to know, what has been your greatest struggle as a CEO since you started your company?
For me, I think there's being a founder and a CEO, there's stepwise functions and different games that you have to play. So YC also talks about this. It's you're playing a series of mini games. At each stage of your company, it's a different game that you're playing, different rules. You got to figure out how to overcome that game and to unlock the next level. And then you're playing a harder game. So the one thing that's true is it always gets harder. So I think it depends on when you ask me, the greatest struggle changes. But I think one constant across all these mini games, for me at least, is the psychological burden of being a founder and building a company, because at some point, we're a team of 23 right now, and I've convinced all the people who I think are really smart in my network to leave their cushy jobs and join my company. And they have families, right? And everyone's kind of believing in the mission and believing in the company that you're building, and you have that burden because you want to make sure that you're taking them on this journey, you're leading the ship right? You're the captain of a ship. You want to make sure the ship gets and lands properly wherever the destination may be. So I think for me, it's that kind of psychological burden of wanting to make sure that our customers who love our product, we can continue supporting them to eternity. And for our team, that honestly is your company is your team, and they all believe in you. And I think that psychological kind of burden is what gets me the most, because I just want to make them proud and make them happy that they're joining this journey.
Great answer. I'd probably just repeat two of those. One is around learning curve, and so the learning curve is steep, right? And so you need to be open to learning new things. Every time the company does grow, there are new kind of problems to solve. And so the problems are shifting. It's not enough to get good at one or two things. And maybe the other one is just that, the struggle of being a founder and CEO is that it is a struggle, right? So you need to be prepared for what's the personal cost and how much of a psychological tax is it going to be to have that with you all the time. And so most people that I've met who are founder CEOs underestimate that, especially if it's the first time they found it, which is interesting, right? Because if most of them are underestimating it, you probably are too. And so that just means that you probably need to raise the threshold of how hard you think it's going to be.
And you talk about, sorry, I just lost my train of thoughts. But early on, I think you mentioned about learning curve. How do you learn things that you do not know? And how do you, I guess, what's the most efficient way that you learn whatever you feel like you don't know?
Maybe there are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, right?
Yep.
So for the known unknowns, there are just a lot of things that you have to cover. So at Woolf, we are international and we operate in a regulated space. And so there are many things that we have to get smart about very, very quickly. It might be immigration in Australia because students graduating from one of our courses need to use a points-based visa system. And we've done immigration in other countries, but not Australia, so we need to get smart really fast. And so the way we handle that operationally is just to set research tasks. And so we get somebody very smart to do a research task and teach us what we don't know. So that's been a really effective strategy for us to align people within the organization around what we don't know and to build a knowledge base around that. The second one's harder, right? So what are the unknown unknowns that you've got as a company? I think there are a couple different approaches to it. One is listening to customers, right? And getting on sales calls and just being open-minded about what's happening there. Another one is setting aside time for kind of prospecting within your own product, where you look at the data and you look at what's happening inside the tool or how people are using it, and just keeping an open mind about what's going on. I found both of those to be pretty practical approaches to the unknown unknowns. And then, within an organization, you'll also begin to notice who are the people who are kind of like canaries in the coal mine, who are always coming up with like the early risks or the early insights. And they might not be things that you always want to adopt, but knowing where those voices come within the company, I think, is really important.
Yeah, agree with everything you said. I think if I were to add on, I guess for maybe as a CEO of a company, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. There's no possible way you can, right? Even if you have an idea, you can. My husband was a CEO of a company, and I thought I kind of knew, but no, it was like way past what I thought it was. So there's kind of like three things that I do to help me with the learning process, knowing that what I don't know is, one is surrounding myself with people who, done it and are ahead of the game. So for me as a Series A founder, like talking to folks who are Series B, or maybe Series C, they might be a little too far off, but just like surrounding yourself with people who are either, experienced in the industry or are CEOs themselves of the same like type of business, like SaaS businesses for me, and Series B, so like you kind of think through and understand what they've went through, and they will share all the learnings of all the mistakes they had to you, so hopefully you make only a fraction of those mistakes. The second thing that I do is I read a lot of like essays and books from CEOs and founders and like kind of draw from their experience in a written form. So that's the second thing you could do, is instead of like building those connections, you just read about it, and you can actually gain a lot of knowledge by reading. And I think the third one, honestly, is just trial and error. You just have to go for it. You have to do it. Things are going to come up. You're going to be scared, but you're just going to have to like do it. That's the only answer. You just have to do it. And then you learn from doing it. Through the process of doing it, you just have to make sure that you're coming at it with a very detail-oriented mindset, because you can't assume you know what you're doing. Like I had to do legal review contracts before sending it to my lawyers because they're so expensive. So you've got to read every single word, like map that to how the product works, map that to your understanding of how the customer's going to use the data. And sales and customer success, you just got to do everything and just be really diligent and detail-minded when you go and try it. Because you're going to make mistakes, and the idea is you minimize your mistakes along the way.
So much more questions on that, on each individual aspect of the company, because like I mean, I myself have run a few companies as well, and it's like, I don't even know whether I'm as good as my own lawyers in reviewing contracts. So like, how did you even do that, right? Like,
Oh, you're definitely
yeah.
not. You just
Yeah.
try to do a pass so that you minimize their review time.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So there's so much in every aspect, like marketing, like sales. There's so much more to understand on that. But also curious to know for both of you, like, what has been the most costly mistake you've had in your company since it started?
I think for us, most costly is bad hires. You're going to have to fire multiple times because sometimes it's on you. You just like didn't scope out the role correctly. You didn't know. And that's the reality of like, you'll get better at this. So that's one of the mini games is hiring. You actually get better at it over time. But in the beginning, you're going to have to hire for roles that you've never done before or you've done, but you don't know how to hire for. And that's going to lead to mistakes. And I think the most cost there is just time, company resources, and money, right? The salary you're paying before you figure out that this isn't going to work, and you have to let them go.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing on hiring. It's especially hard very early on because the departments haven't been built yet, the culture isn't set yet, and so you've got multiple moving targets. On the one hand, the new hire might be awesome at another company, but not awesome at your company. Or they might be really, really good the day they come in, but then things grow and it's no longer the right fit, or you shift directions because you need to pivot as a company. So all those are just super hard. You've got multiple moving targets that you're trying to align, especially when the teams aren't yet formed. And so I think you can hire really, really good people, but they aren't necessarily the right people in the company. So being able to fire very quickly is important as well.
Got it. And thanks for sharing. We're now opening up to questions from the audience. I'm sure a lot of you will have, and I'll bring over the mic here. Hold on.
Hi there, Alex Ontiveros from the SVL agency. Just wanted to check with you, how important is storytelling in your process?
I would say storytelling is really important in the early stages of fundraising. That's one area where, as you're raising your seed round, you don't really have anything. Like you maybe have a prototype of a product, and if you want, you can like self-fund long enough where you have a product. But at the seed stage, it's really important to do storytelling and talk about, why this is a problem that you're solving, why the market is big, why you as a founder, you and your co-founder are the right people to go and tackle this problem. And that's all mostly storytelling with, there's some evidence there, but mostly is how do you help the investor understand, connect the dots that you're seeing so they can see it without seeing the data around like revenue or customers and traction. The second area that storytelling is really important is early hiring. Because again, you don't have much, people don't really know who you are, and so it's really important that you tell the story of, why this is exciting journey to be on, and why you are the right CEO, your co-founder is the right co-founder, CTO, whatever co-founder you choose to bring on, are the right people to lead this journey and steer the ship. So to me, those actually the third point is early customers. So we got early paid customers before we had a product because I ended up realizing that using a sales pitch didn't work for SaaS. Actually, storytelling worked because what happens is your early customers, they want to go on this journey with you. It's not that you have a great product, you don't in reality, but they see the problem, they think they need the problem, and the only reason why they're going to take that leap and sign that contract with you is because they believe in you. And they know that you're going to be the person that they work with. And so storytelling there was really important and helped us close all our early customers.
Yeah, have to agree on all the points, fundraising, hiring. Maybe if there's one to add, it's internal to the company. You can't set out the rules and like specific tasks for everything that's happening in the organization. And so getting people organized around where you're going becomes really important. You have to let smart people be able to make their own independent decisions. And so storytelling about what phase of the business you're in right now, what's the next stage we're trying to get to, where are we going this quarter, those become more important.
Any other questions?
I kind of do have a question. question. Yeah, I was piecing it together in my mind.
No worries.
One of the things I've been paying attention to is, sort of the wake of the Theranos scandal and sort of the what it's done to the image of startups and everything. So I was curious about if you've sort of like pivoted or thought about your startup and bringing people on board in a different way to build that kind of trust with the marketplace in a way that maybe not necessarily in reaction to, but just considering what's happening, and that's from the Theranos example. Just curious.
I don't. We're not in biotech, so it's not quite as close. But there is a sense that people are over-egging the stories, right? That the sales pitch is too big for the reality. And so I think you have to be really clear, both with your new hires, with your investors, and with customers. What's aspirational, what's fully productized, and what's just kind of operational. We're piecing it together with duct tape. And so keeping those three parts really clear with people becomes important. They need to know where you're going, right? And that's the big story. Nobody's buying your kind of crappy seed stage product because they think it's an awesome product. They're buying it because they know you're building something that's going to be bigger. But you've got to be really clear with them about where you stand today and where you think you're going to go.
Yeah, I think there's kind of like two groups of startups. One is there needs to be a technological breakthrough for the story to work. And one is, so long as you can execute, you don't need a genius to come in and do the work. So long as you can just execute. And that's likely where both our businesses are. It's just, can you execute towards that vision? You don't have to come up with how do you take a single drop of blood and get all your data around it. That hasn't been done before, versus building products so that you realize this vision of how you think the world should work, and your customers are mirroring the vision through either data of how they're using the product or their own opinions of how they would want to work. Are you setting the vision that aligns with where your customer needs to go, and do you have data to prove it, and all you need to do is just get there? And I think that's a big difference for us.
Yeah, I like the distinction of a potentially revolutionary technology and other more real applications. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Anybody? Last question before we end the session?
I'll do it. You talked a little bit about bringing people on and hiring and firing or letting go when it's the time to do that, right? How are you navigating in a time where there's so much focus on wellness and well-being and mental wellness, I guess? And I'm all for that. But I find, and I hear stories from a lot of my friends that are in different startups, and there's a lot of frustration around God, but how about some mental toughness? Because I think there's so much catering to I don't know, a different time that we're in. And I think, sometimes we just got to push through and have a little bit of the grit or resilience that you guys talk about. If you could talk a little bit to that.
So I would say, being a early stage startup, however you might define it, auto filters for that to some extent, because when they join a seed or Series A company, maybe even early Series B, they know what they're getting into. They know that they are joining because they're really excited about the mission, and they're here to do their best work and reach their full potential as an individual who can kind of come to this company and just blossom. So at least that's what I hire for when I bring on people is, are they coming to ModernLoop because they have the skill set, obviously, but what is the reasoning behind why ModernLoop? Is it that they have untapped potential at a large company, right? At a large company, you're really only taking 20% probably of your full impact, and because the other 80% is politics and meetings and stuff that doesn't really move the needle for customers in the company. Are they taking that and they want to join a company because they want to exert and get to as much as 100% potential and impact as possible? So that for us, that's something we hire for, and that's something that I think naturally, through people who are interested in seed or Series A companies, naturally they themselves filter themselves out if they don't think they're ready for the journey.
maybe the only thing I'd add is, first off, we're majority non-American as a company, and so the work ethos for the company tends to be pretty high, right? And the work expectations tend to be fairly high. So that's one of the factors. I've tended to see it in younger Americans, where the work ethos is a little bit less. Our kind of tactical solution to that is just to be very clear pre-hire. This is what your 30, 60, 90 is likely to look like, and by 90 days, this is where we think you're going to be. And if we get in and we're 30 days and not a lot's happening, it's going to be very clear. This is kind of our workload expectation, and this is where we need to get to. So just being super frank about, hey, it's a startup. It is hard, but it's also a lot of fun, and you get to engage with smart people, and it's an awesome mission to be on. And as we grow as an organization, hopefully, the workload will be a little bit less. But this is where we are at today. So just being frank, and then you auto-select for people.
All right, I think this is it for this session. And I'll hand it back to Elisa. Thank you so much, Lydia and Joshua. Your time is amazing. And just sharing this is so important.